Is now the time? The world is fast growing bored of the Ukrainian war. It's human nature to eventually just lose interest in things, trends and topics change and people's attention shifts to new and more exciting subjects, especially those that are not so depressing. The problem is that as the public's interest wanes, so does the politicians. They will generally go where the public wants them to, and if the people are less interested in supporting Ukraine, well, that makes it easier for the politicians to walk away. Polls are starting to turn against the Ukrainian people, and certain aspects will continue to affect global public opinion, for example pain and suffering at home, whilst continuing to send scarce resources abroad and the pace of the counter-offensive, making some to assume they are backing the wrong horse. These are unavoidable issues that would need to be toughed out. But what Ukraine must avoid is to create new problems, avoidable ones that will be used to drive them further from their support base. Towards the start of this year, the EU restricted Ukrainian grain to allow Poland, Bulgaria, Hungary, Romania and Slovakia to ban the domestic sales of Ukrainian wheat, maize, rapeseed and sunflower seeds while permitting transit of such cargoes for export elsewhere. While the restriction expired last week, Warsaw, Bratislava and Budapest announced their bans on Ukrainian grain and said they were acting in the interests of their economies and that the move was intended to protect their farmers. The three countries have complained that a glut of Ukrainian grain threatens their domestic markets. In response to this, Kyiv is now considering suing Poland, Hungary and Slovakia over these bans. Now personally, I couldn't care less about Hungary, sue them. But both Poland and Slovakia have been staunch supporters of Ukraine's war effort. So surely there is a better alternative? What's more, reports are also saying that Kyiv could also impose reciprocal measures on Poland, like banning the import of fruit and vegetables into Ukraine. The EU allowed its ban to expire on Friday after Ukraine said it would take measures to tighten control of exports to neighboring countries, in the hope of stopping a flood of uncontrolled Ukrainian grains onto the global market. Pre-invasion, the majority of Ukrainian grains were exported through their Black Sea ports, to places like Nigeria. Since the Russian aggression has effectively closed this option, Ukraine is forced to export its grains by land. With these three countries on the border, it stands to reason that these grains will pass through their lands onto alternative markets, but due to the price being significantly cheaper, the grains are finding their way into the local markets of these countries and horribly affecting the ability of the local farmers to sell their more expensive grains. Given Ukraine's reliance on agriculture, a loss of sales is a massive financial burden. But there also needs to be a level of understanding that Poland and Slovakia cannot simply be expected to absorb the grain without due consideration for their own agricultural needs. What's more, there is the question of what costs more right now, a loss in grain revenue or a loss in global support, because you can be sure this situation is going to be exploited by the Kremlin. I have said it before a million times, the only chance Russia has, is to force the cracks in these relationships wide open. We have already seen Polish farmers protesting and the effect that had. More protests and more bitterness will cause support to fail. It's impossible to separate the issue of grains and the unfailing Polish support for the war. So, the question remains, is now the time? I do not for a second think it is. I think Ukraine needs to come up with alternative solutions and to work together with their friends and supporters on this issue. Generating more ill will when plenty is floating around is a mistake and should be avoided at all costs. Ukraine already has one war to deal with. They do not need a trade war with their allies.